Well, welcome everybody, and not just those of you in the room, but people who are watching this live on C-SPAN. We're glad to have you here. I know by now we've been in this generation long enough. I don't need to tell you to turn off your cell phones or turn off the sound, but do, if you don't mind. So I want to welcome all of you here, but also I want to call special attention we have two groups of students here. Here at the Aspen Institute, we have a very exciting program on youth engagement, and we have students here from the Perez School. And where are you? All right, great. And from the Cesar Chavez Public Charter Schools for Public Policy. Where are you? All right. So welcome. When we get to the Q&A, you're as welcome as anybody else to ask questions, and hope you will. Let me start with a little story here to just get us started in this environment that we live in, which is so constantly contentious and uncivil. So I run a program here that we started at the Institute 12 years ago. It's called the Rodel Fellowships, the Rodel Fellowships in Public Leadership. And what we do, I'm going to be very brief about this, but what we do is we go out every year and we find the 24 top young political leaders in the country. Some are mayors, some are lieutenant governors, state treasurers, speakers of the House, whatever. And we started this in 2005. That's when we picked our very first class of fellows, and three of those fellows went on to become members of Congress. One was a state rep from Arizona, one was a state rep from Minnesota, one was the state treasurer of Kansas. They came into the program, and as I was doing this, and I was searching for people, I found the lieutenant governor of Maryland, and the president of the county council in Montgomery County, Maryland, who you have now known that are really truly among the great young stars in American government, American politics. And what we do is we are aimed to get at creating a bonding between people who don't join the same political club, so that we can look at things as Americans in common. We sit down and talk together about Aristotle and Locke and Hobbes. We're not going to do that. No assigned readings for today. And we do this.
Hobbes is a little weak.
And the way this happens, the way it develops, is that when that state rep from Arizona, who was in that first class with Tom and Mike, was shot. Her name was Gabby Giffords. And when she was shot, all of the people in the program came together in their love for her. Nobody paid any attention to what party she was in. And a story that even more, so Tom won't deny this, Tom's a liberal Democrat. And when President Obama nominated him to be head of the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department, the way that our politics works, obviously the Republican senators all thought we have to stop this terrible guy, and the Republican members of the Rodel Fellowship wrote to their Republican senators and said, no, this is a good man. This is a good man, you ought to support him. And this is, Tom and Mike are good friends of each other, they're good friends of mine, they're good friends of the Aspen Institute. They, to me, represent the very best in what American politics can be. And so I'm really excited to have you both here together.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's and you've spent a lot of time at the Aspen Institute. We've been very lucky to keep them engaged as we've gone along. So we're going to have time for your questions at the end. I was reminded that there's a clock that I'm looking right at, so that I will know if we have gone on too long and need to get to the questions. But I want to start with a couple, that I asked. So before I do, because some of you have not been in this room before. This is a big new room that we have. And I want to thank Michelle Smith, and the Robert Smith Family Foundation, because they sponsor this series that we are putting on, and so we want them to be recognized for that. So, Tom and Mike, I don't care, which of you answers first. I mean, you can actually, we can fight it out. That could be the very first fight you.
Well, he's the one with titles, so he should go first.
Yeah.
I'm just former, so it's the best title in D.C.
We all want our friends to do well, and we don't want our friends to find themselves in a mess. I cannot imagine why either of you took on these jobs as national chairman. So you're in a situation here where there are great divisions and nasty divisions between the two political parties. There are very sharp divisions within your party that cause people in your party to be looking over their shoulder constantly. Are you seen compromising? Are you seen searching for the common good? You're going to get in trouble. Money, which you both have to worry about, raising money for the political party. Money more and more goes not to the parties, but to special interest groups trying to influence the elections. So just talk a little bit about the challenge of being a national party chairman and what you have to deal with and how you can make your party relevant and make it work for the good of the country. How do you do that? How do you look at this job you've got? You want to go first, Tom?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I want to say, Mickey, thank you to you on behalf of all the Rodel fellows, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. You've been such a great mentor to all of us, and
thank you.
I know I speak on behalf of all the Rodel fellows in saying thank you. Michael was my friend in Maryland. Michael continues to be my friend, and we have a lot of good conversations. That doesn't mean we don't have disagreements of significance. We do, but we understand the importance of that dialogue. You asked the question, why would I have done such a seemingly crazy thing?
Yeah, nutty
and
actually.
For me, this was I really believe this is a where were you moment, and I say this all respectfully. I woke up November the 8th assuming that there was going to be a different outcome, that Hillary Clinton would be elected, and that we would have a different pathway. President Obama inherited a mess. Things got better. There was still unfinished business, and I was hoping that Hillary Clinton could take this nation to the next level. And we all know what happened. And so for me, it was a where were you moment. I actually think being out there now is even more important. And the question that I asked is, how could I make the biggest difference? What I love the most about working at the Labor Department and the Justice Department is you got to help people at scale. When you pass a regulation that helps 2 million home health workers, mostly women of color on food stamps, get access to minimum wage and overtime protections, that for me is the definition of a good week. When you are the successful chair of a party and you can help build strong parties in all 50 states so that you can elect people who share your vision, and they can do good things at scale, whether they're the mayor, whether they're on the county council, whether they're in the state senate, whether they're in the U.S. Senate. That, for me, is the definition of a good week. And we have to be honest with ourselves as Democrats. We not only didn't prevail in the November election, but when you look back at the last 10 years, we've lost roughly 900 seats in state legislatures. We had 60 Democrats in the Senate when Barack Obama took office. We have 48 now. We had 30 or so governors in 2009. We're in the teens now, and the list goes on. And so when we build strong parties, when we build a strong Democratic Party, and when we build those strong partnerships, we elect Democrats who share that vision of opportunity for everyone and not just opportunity for a few. And that's why I decided to get in. And I am excited about being in, because right now, I was a 14-year veteran at the Justice Department. I'm proud to tell you that I served as a career person under George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton. Our independence was our most important currency. And when I see what's happening today, when I see a tweet today that I used to prosecute obstruction of justice cases. And when I see things like that today, that's a threat to our democracy. And you know, the beauty of Watergate at the end was that Republicans and Democrats put nation above party. And so I got involved in this, Mickey, because I really do believe that this president is a dangerous person. And we need to make sure we have a strong Democratic Party. And when we build those strong parties, I think we can really make progress.
Yeah, Mike, when you got into this also, you know, it was a time when the Republican Party was starting to become two parties, you know, even more
Still
so
is.
than the Bernie. Yeah, so I mean, you really were taking on something that was falling apart.
It was, first off, thanks again, Mickey. It's good to be back with you and to be a part of the Aspen family. Really enjoy these conversations and to hang out with my buddy over here, which we go back to our days in Maryland, and it really is about, I mean, the one thing, if you're going to look at what we have in common, besides our hairstyles and things
or
like
lack
that,
thereof,
is that we're grassroots guys. And we fundamentally come from that space where real people live out their lives every day. He has a different Tom has a different philosophical approach at how to best enhance and help and be a part of those communities of people who grow and prosper. My view is different as well, and that's the sweet spot where you go to compete around ideas and policy and things like that. So that, for me, has always been a foundational idea. I learned that growing up in Washington, D.C. This is my home. I grew up in Petworth, and one of the things I learned very early in life that you have to be not just smart about your goals and aspirations, but a little bit fleet of foot, particularly when you're a black Roman Catholic conservative growing up in Washington, D.C. Not the easiest thing in the world to do, but you also learn in those environments about people. So getting involved politically for me was something that began very early on and stayed with me throughout my life. So the fortuitous opportunities to become Lieutenant Governor of Maryland and then to become chairman of the Republican National Committee were not political opportunities for me, but they were an opportunity to Tom's point, to affect change, real time, on behalf of real people. So as Lieutenant Governor, to be able to put the machine of government to work on behalf of people was a good day, a good week, a good month, a good year. And we were able to do that. As party person, the opportunity to involve communities of people politically. The one thing that always got me, well, there are a lot of things that got me in trouble when I was chairman, but the one thing that I could never really get people to really appreciate down to the core was this concept that at the end of the day, it's not about where you line up or what side you're on. Is that whatever field you decide to play on, you have full access to the field. And if the parties do their job the right way, you're going to get the recruits, you're going to get the converts, people will come to you. I don't need to go out and tell you, well, because you are a black, Sunday-going, social conservative, that you should be a Republican. Okay, and then what? Because when I look at these other things about your party, I'm not happy with what I see. Nor should I then look at a community and go, because you are a pro-life or a pro-choice person, you should be a Democrat or not be a Democrat. When we start putting these labels on people's livelihoods, it becomes very difficult for parties to grow and be successful. And that's one of the things I learned very, very early on. Going into the Republican Party leadership for me was about making it relevant for people. Inheriting a party that had, and you know this very well now, that has a real sucky name brand, that is struggling internally with factions. Your progressive wing that has emerged is no different than the conservative right wing that emerged on the Republican side. So the challenge is, how do you get everybody to play on this field in a way that you advance the ultimate cause of empowering people politically to engage and be a part of a process. Yeah, it's all about winning elections. We did a very good job in 2010. I got about 763 of those 900 seats in 2010. But as I look back on that, the question then becomes, what did we do with that? What did we learn from it? And that's the space we now find ourselves in, and the challenge that both parties have to realize.
So, but as things have developed more recently, you've chosen to do those jobs from the top of the establishment, right? The head of the party. We had on the Democratic side the virtual anointment of all the party leaders, all the establishment, that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee. There was no question about that. Then she spent the next year fending off an attack from somebody who wasn't even a Democrat. Then you had on the Republican side, you had somebody who had never been really a Republican, and everybody knew it was going to be Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio, depending on which one won the Florida primary, and neither one of them came close. So, does the party itself really? I mean, I see how you can really be an advocate for points of view, as you've both pointed out. But does the party itself in this age still retain the ability to shape what ends up on the ballot representing the party? Do people at the grassroots listen to, do they care what you think? Do they care what you think? I mean, are they going to do what they're going to do and thank you for whatever you can do to send support out here to whoever we finally choose? I mean, how does that work?
Sure. I mean, we have an undeniable, and I think Michael referred to it. I don't know exactly the word you used, but if we were in a business school marketing class, we would talk about brand degradation. Right. We've done a lot of focus groups and house calls. I've been traveling the country, and I hear with frequency, what do you stand for? You didn't show up in my community. You can't show up every 4th October in my church and call that an organizing strategy. Or I feel politically homeless. These are all direct quotes from real people that I met. And I understand moving forward as a Democratic Party that we have to do a better job of articulating what we stand for. We are the party that has always stood for what Ted Kennedy called the common man and the common woman, making sure that people have access to economic security. We were always and continue to be, and that's the reason we're the longest party, I think, in the history of our nation, a party that embraces everyone, regardless of where you were born, regardless of who you worship, regardless of who you love, regardless of your first language. And what I've been trying to do and what others have been trying to do is to make sure we put our values into action, Mickey, because there's this tremendous energy across America. There are all of these groups that have been emerging. I mean, Donald Trump has been a uniter in one sense, because January 20th was important, undeniably, but in my mind, January 21st was far more important. Women across this country in the millions came together, and you see this unity expressed in so many different ways. And so the challenge for the Democratic Party is to work in partnership with all of these allies. The fight against the repeal of the Affordable Care Act isn't simply Democrats. I mean, Republicans have pre-existing conditions. Democrats have pre-existing conditions. Independents have pre-existing conditions. And those town hall meetings that, in Utah and elsewhere, those weren't paid political operatives there. Those were organically arranged and coming together people who were about to lose their livelihood and potentially their lives. And so I think a big part of what we have to do, Mickey, is lead with our values, demonstrate who we are, and not in a Bigfoot way. This isn't Al Haig. This is about us being there in partnership, and that's what we've been trying to do. I mean, there's I met with an Indivisible group in Phoenix when I was out there recently, and I knew a lot of the folks there because Phoenix, Arizona has a full employment act for civil rights lawyers between Joe Arpaio and Jan Brewer and other things, and the and what impressed me the most about that meeting was the energy in the room and the unity of purpose. And when we lead with our values and when we're a conspicuous presence on issues that keep people up at night, that's how I think we earn that trust back. Trust isn't something you're given. It's something you have to earn. And a lot of folks have lost trust in the party, and that's what we're out to do, is to make sure we earn that trust through our actions. And whether it's the Affordable Care Act repeal efforts, whether it's immigration, whether it's fighting for good jobs and good wages, and stemming this so-called skinny budget, which is, I think, morally bankrupt in so many ways. We are a compassionate nation. We're a strong nation because we're compassionate. And I think we can afford to fund Meals on Wheels and legal services and other services, workforce services. And so when we're doing that, Mickey, I think that's when we're at our best. But we have undeniable work to do in re-earning that trust in rural, in urban, suburban pockets of this nation.
Yeah, and Mike, and also let me just two parts of that, and you can come back to it, you know, if you want to. So the two questions that come to my mind in that regard are: is there in that process, is there a litmus test for you know, who fits within this the scenario? And the second is, who will make that ultimate decision about who you are? Will it be who the establishment wants, or who the grassroots choose and say, okay, now that defines the party? So,
well, you were so much more polite about that than the way I was going to respond.
Go for it, Mike.
Here's the problem with what the chairman just said. It's not reality. And let me tell you what, I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but here's a little taste of the reality I had a month into my job. So I'm down in Florida meeting with grassroots activists and donors. In the morning, I'm meeting with a group of people who tell me that the most important thing I need to do as chairman of the Republican Party is to be the leader on the fight against gay marriage, to be the leader. The party needs to lead in the fight on abortion. The party needs to make very clear our social conservative values and principles. We need to be strong advocates for the Second Amendment. You know the litany. You know the list. Literally 3 hours later, I'm in a meeting in the afternoon, and I'm told that as party chairman, the party needs to be focused not on those social issues, but on the economy and growth and jobs. Two very different meetings, two different group of people who will stand up and swear on a stack of Bibles that they are card-carrying, hard-charging conservative Republicans who have very two different views of their party and their country. That was the precursor to what we saw play out in 2016. So in a microcosm, in that moment, you can wax poetic about what we should do, but the reality is ultimately going to rest with what the people want to do. And the challenge for a party chairman and the challenge for a national party is to recognize that that's not where the action is, where you are. The action is in every individual community. And what you have to try to do, and I think this is why we were successful in 2010, is to link those communities with a common thought, a common theme. Now, for me, it was not challenging Barack Obama, despite the fact that I had every brother and sister in the world coming at me going, you need to talk about Barack Obama. I'm like, Barack Obama's not our fight. Our fight is a little bit closer to the ground. Some things we can nationalize, other things we can't. But we got to recognize where the fight is. Like, we have to understand, thank you, I got this up. We have to understand exactly what we have to do on the ground, because the ground is where the action is. All right? So what we did was we nationalized, in a sense, Nancy Pelosi. All right? Because everybody relates to their congressman close to the ground. And what you do is you make the argument a little bit more personal. You make it a little bit closer to where people are. I would go into communities and I would just say to people, if you want a better dog catcher, if you want trash pickup service, fire Nancy Pelosi. All right. So in other words, you bring it into an area because the president was the president. And this is the mistake you guys are going to make. I'm just giving you a little advice. You may not want it. Focus all day if you want on Donald Trump. And you will lose. Because that means you're not listening to what people are saying. So, Chairman, you just had that reality hit you on the abortion question. Because everything you're saying, you want to reach out to folks, then if you say that in the one breath, and this was the challenge I really much tried to avoid, you got to recognize that your party is bigger than what you think it is. And it includes more people than you may ever know who come to your table with a whole lot of ish that's important to them. So there are pro-life Democrats just as there are pro-choice Democrats. There are pro-choice Republicans just as there are pro-life Republicans. And as a chairman, if you don't recognize that, you will fail. And you've got, just as I learned in those two conversations in Florida, and I finally had, at a cocktail reception that evening, got members from each of those groups in the same room. So we're standing around, we're having drinks. And it occurred to me as I was listening to their conversation, here we go. So I said to one who was all about the pro-life and, the conservative, I said, look, you don't like abortions, do you? He was like, absolutely not. And the other gentleman, I turned to him and I said, and you don't want to pay for them, do you? And he says, absolutely not. I said, then what are we fighting about? The point was not so much that I needed the pro-choice guy who was concerned about the economy and economic issues to agree that, to come over and be a pro-life person, or the pro-life person to suddenly come over and take on the pro-choice position. What I needed them to agree or begin to see, and this is where what Mickey has talked about and what Aspen has done, what the Rodel program has instilled, is to find that little bit of a thread where you can begin to have a different conversation than the one you're prepared to have, where you're going to stand in the corner and fight and resist and lob, names at each other. And so in that moment where they kind of looked at each other and went, yeah, I guess that's kind of the case, yeah. The subject changed. It was not that important to talk about that anymore because they realized, oh, okay, yeah, you don't want to pay for them, I don't want them, so, how are your kids? And it's not that simple always, I know that, but you got to look at these moments and you have to see, particularly in these times, that this election was so much more than just about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. It was really about Bernie Sanders. And it was really about, Republicans and Democrats and these individuals who out there who brought something else to the table that resonated with voters. And the parties now have to figure out how to really navigate this new water. It's bumpy, it's not calm, and that's because the voters want it that way. Tom is not changing that. I didn't change that as chairman. Pelosi and McConnell and Ryan have no impact on that. They're on those seas as well. And so you are the reason we are where we are. Not the money. Jeb Bush had $150 million, got his butt kicked. Hillary Clinton had $1 billion. Hello. It wasn't the money. It wasn't these hard edges. It was exactly what the voters wanted. And so now in the political system, we just saw this in France. Who's the president of France? A guy with no political experience at 39 years old who's never held office, and he's not aligned with either of the major parties, which got kicked to the curb in the primary 2 weeks ago. They weren't even in the final running for president. Why? Because that's the way the people wanted it. So the political establishment now has to meet where the people are and then decide how you regrow the parties around this new environment.
Michael said a number of things that I think are important and interesting, and I agree with some of them. The Democratic Party needs to do a better job of making house calls. I think we spend way too much money buying television ads and not enough money organizing. And when you don't have a 12-month organizing capacity in place across America, you're just not listening to people. I believe in data analytics, and you need to have that modeling out there, but that modeling can't supplant good old-fashioned door knocking and listening, because you just have your finger on the pulse of communities when you do that. One thing I would observe that I think is true for both the Republican and the Democratic Party, and I think it's a bad tendency for both, is this tendency when you walk in a room for some to say, I'd like you to identify what kind of Republican you are, what kind of Democrat you are. Hi, I'm Tom Perez. I'm a, progressive Democrat, or I'm a conservative Democrat. I don't know what the word establishment means, because I think Ted Kennedy would have been an establishment Democrat under the definition of some. Ted Kennedy was, in my mind, the chair of the accomplishments wing of the Democratic Party. He got stuff done. And that's why he has a museum of accomplishments to talk about it. And I think what we have to do, and what we're trying to do, is move away from asking those questions, which are kind of loaded Rorschach test kind of questions, and ask the question, and this is the question to me that what it's all about, are you lifting people up? When we did an overtime rule at the Labor Department, we were trying to lift up 10 million workers who'd been working 80 hours a week, and they hadn't gotten a meaningful raise in years because the rules had been changed by folks in the Bush administration, and in a way that gave all the leverage to employers and all the leverage away from workers. When you bring together police departments and communities that have been torn apart by unrest, and I spent a good part of my career doing that, you're lifting up both. When you don't ask those false choice kind of questions, and when I hear people like Donald Trump ask the question in the police context, whose side are you on? The police or the community? I've been involved in this space for a long time, Mickey, and I know because frontline officers have told me time and time again, your most important currency as a police officer is the trust of the community. And so when we're asking that question, are we lifting people up as opposed to bringing them down? That's the question that we need to continue to ask. And all too frequently, we get away from this. And I think when we summon our better angels, when hope's on the ballot, as it was in 2008, Democrats did pretty well. We live in a fear world right now. And there's a lot of understandable economic anxiety that people feel. And we didn't do a good enough job as Democrats of understanding that. And I'm not just talking about 2016. I'm talking about we're losing elections, up and down the ballot. And that's why I talk about house calls. That's why I talk about getting back to basics. When the water infrastructure, when your pipes corrode, it has public health and life-threatening consequences. And when your political infrastructure corrodes, it can have consequences up and down the ballot. So we're engaged at the DNC in an infrastructure project, as well as a messaging project. Understanding what we should be doing, communicating that message, and building the infrastructure that enables that message to translate into results for Democrats.
Yeah. Now, I was thinking about something that Mike said, that one of the things I learned in Congress, and that every politician knows, is the worst thing that can happen is if you get all your supporters in the same room at the same time. It's so different. But you have both now laid out things where your parties have failed to make the connections they need to, and so forth. So there's over 40% of Americans today call themselves independents. They don't want anything to do with either of your parties. Is that the future? I mean, are political parties, going to be a thing of the past? Because people, as you both have pointed out for reasons of what the parties have done over the years, that the American people are kind of saying, we don't want this, where they're moving away from the party structure and more supporting, I'll pick the candidates one at a time, or I may lean this way, but I now have, I'm from Oklahoma, I represented Oklahoma, but have a house in Massachusetts, and I vote in Massachusetts. And there, the unenrolled voters, which is the way that in Massachusetts we identify independents, outnumber either Republicans or Democrats.
And that's a growing trend,
Yeah.
and I quite honestly think it's a good one. When I was state party chairman in Maryland, one of the things we did for an election cycle was to open up our primary to independent voters. Why? Because as I articulated at the time, they're voters. And you imagine that.
It's a very good rationale.
Yeah, I thought it made sense to me, you know. So, but more importantly, let's get them in the game. Let's engage them. Why should they sit on the sidelines and watch from afar, and then you go, you know, trying to corral them for a general election where they don't know anything about your candidates, or they've learned something, you know, that is not very helpful to your side about your candidate by the other team. So you want to engage them as much as possible. And so I've always been open to the idea of the more the merrier. And I think the country is now beginning to move a little bit more in that direction, where they see the efficacy of having someone outside the system challenge the status quo of the system. And the establishments, which is why that term has become such a pejorative term in the last couple of cycles, in the minds of a lot of voters, is that thing which builds a wall to protect the interest of those inside the wall, behind the wall. Whether it's the moneyed interest, the political interest, all of those folks are in this little cabal together, and we're on the outside living with the consequences of their asininity, a word I just probably made up. But the reality for a lot of these people goes back to what I was saying before, is that they're looking for ways to empower themselves because they're not getting that empowerment from their parties. And they're angry, they're frustrated. I can speak very clearly about the Republican side. I can't tell you how many folks, you know, have expressed over the years their concern and disdain for where the direction the party is going. A lot of people think the Tea Party, which occurred within the first few months of my watch as national chairman, was something that happened in 2009. No, baby, that was going on back to 2004. That seed was planted long before 2009 and 2010. Why? Because you're talking about people who basically had been lied to. Remember, I don't know how many of you attended, maybe you did, Jim, you attended and covered the closing and shutting down of the Department of Education. Remember, we were going to shut that down. And we ran campaigns on closing the Department of Education. We ran campaigns on, oh, we're going to reverse Roe versus Wade, give us a Supreme Court, right? And, you know, let us get the leadership in the Senate and the House and the presidency, and we're going to do these things, right? What happened? Those things didn't happen. Voters had relied on the promise that if I commit to you, I fund you, I vote for you, then you're going to go do and live up to the commitments that you said in this campaign. When you were going to close down the Department of Education, when you were going to reverse Roe versus Wade, when you were going to push back on this move towards, you know, gay marriage and all of this other stuff socially, right? And at a certain point, the voters go, what the hell, am I stupid? None of this is happening. It's not happening. And what do? They respond in kind. And why was Donald Trump successful? And what is the one thing you hear about him even to this day? And despite all the crazy that's going on, what are his voters saying? He's doing what he said he was going to do. That matters to a lot of these constituents out here, and how the parties now follow up. And this is going to be a challenge. I mean, you know, God love you, brother. This is going to be a real challenge because the voters are restless, and they will take from the national parties and give to themselves. And they will give to those who they feel really invoke that independent spirit, who are willing to stand up and push back against the status quo, who are willing to lose an election for them. That's an important piece. They're willing to lose an election for them. And if that candidate or candidates emerge, watch out. Both parties will have a real challenge on their hand. Now, the system is designed, as you know, Mickey, to prevent third parties from really kind of growing here. But I think the grassroots out there could have a different mindset in 2020, even beginning maybe in 2018. Look at some of these races and see how these candidates make the case for the future. And you'll get a sense of those who are listening to where voters are and are looking to move in that space, and those who are still playing the status quo because they want Tom's money. And that's going to be a real challenge.
Tom, well, you know, they want your money. What are you gonna...
I was with Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado earlier this week, and we were having a similar conversation. I believe, and I've looked at the data recently in Colorado, but I think unaffiliated voters are now the largest percentage in Colorado. Having said that, here's the reality. When you walk into a voting booth today, in most states, you know, New York has the working families line, they've got a number of other lines, but when you walk into the voting booth in most places, you're going to vote for an R or a D. And that's why I've been spending a lot of time in my first few months on the job, not simply speaking at Democratic Party dinners, but going out there in communities, you know, where I'm with folks, the majority of whom are not registered Democrats. And I believe our key to success there is to make sure that we understand and we can persuade them that our values are your values. I mean, you have an EPA administrator who denies that climate change is a problem. You know, and that is so contrary to what the majority of the American people think. And I'll tell you, I'm the parent of 3 millennials. That's just a foreign concept to them, this notion that climate change is a hoax. Climate change is a reality for them. And so when we lead with our values and we're there side by side with them, I'd love for them to get back into the Democratic Party fold, and my job is to earn that trust. My job also in the short run is to make sure they understand on the issues that you care about the most, we are aligned with you. And this is an area where I disagree with Michael, and this is going to be a challenge moving ahead. I agree with Michael that what we have to do as a Democratic Party is not simply say what we're against and what Donald Trump is doing wrong. I totally agree that we have to articulate what we are for and what we will do and what we are doing. Where I think the challenge is very interesting, and this is, you know, one of those to be determined moments, right. Is that Michael said, well, Donald Trump, in the eyes of some voters, is doing exactly what he said. Well, I'm not sure about that. Donald Trump said that I'm going to bring you health care that ensures that everyone has access to health care cheaper and better. Man, if I've got a pre-existing condition, I sure don't feel like it's cheaper and better. Donald Trump said on day one, I will label China a currency manipulator. Did he do that? No. And you know what happened? Why that didn't happen? Well, you know, his family business had been trying for years to get trademarks in China. They were denied. And guess what just happened? They got them. And I was just talking to some steel workers. Some of them voted for Donald Trump because they wanted change. Losing your health care is not the change they were voting for. You know, business as usual with China. You know, China overproduces steel. And this isn't something that Donald Trump caused. This has been going on for a long time. Their overproduction capacity exceeds how much steel is being produced in the United States, Canada, Japan, and all of Europe combined. What does that mean? They are exporting their low-cost steel, and they're exporting their unemployment to the United States. Donald Trump said he was going to do something about that. You know who else is a big steel producer dumping steel in the United States? Russia. You think he's going to stand up to him? So part of the challenge moving forward, and again, this is a to-be-determined challenge. He promised change. Is this the change you were looking for when you took a flyer on the guy? And again, we need to not only articulate what he's done, but we again need to articulate what we stand for.
I appreciate everything you just said, and factually you're spot on. All right? But 40% of the electorate out there are in total opposition with what you just said. They don't see it that way. So what you got to do is put on their sunglasses, eyeglasses, or contact lenses and understand what it is they see. And if you
I think, Mike, it's 34%.
Well,
Or something like that.
okay, let's be fair. Let's do the range, 34 to 40. The numbers, depending on what poll you're looking at. But it's a significant number of people in pockets of the country you are not winning in. All right? So I appreciate the East Coast, West Coast view of America. But the reality is where moms and pops are in the middle of that. And that was Hillary Clinton's problem. That was Bernie Sanders' strength. That was the problem you're going to have negotiating going forward, because your progressive wing is making it very clear. You used the term before, Mickey, litmus tests. Same problem we saw on the right with the litmus test. I had people come to me and actually wanted to codify a litmus test in the party platform. I was like, hell no, we're not doing that. I'm not going to stand at the door with a clipboard and go, well, are you this? Are you that? Are you this? But that's where the extremes want to go in the conversation. And the question becomes, how do you have that discussion when you have this group pushing in this way and everybody else is over here? So I appreciate everything you just said, but the question becomes, how do you translate that into something that moves me off of where I am with Trump? Because that's what you're going to have to do if you think you're going to win in 2018 and 2020. Good luck.
So we... well, you know, we're all politicians, so you can get your answer in whatever question I ask or they ask. But we've got about 30 minutes. We're going to turn to Q&A. I have one more quick question that I want to ask that you can hopefully answer very briefly. Before I do that, I want to introduce two people, because our Rodel program, which brings these guys together, these wonderful guys, doesn't exist without them, because they make it happen. So Beth Semmel and Kat Godfrey. You know, you two are the ones who make this program run. So, this is the final question. You know, you can be brief, but we're talking, both of you agree with this, you know, that what we want to do is find a place where we can be more American than we are Republican, more American than we are Democrat, where we can talk to each other, where we can be civil with each other, where if there is an area for common ground, we can find it. Do you see a path forward? Can we get there?
Well, I think one of the most important things we have to do to enable us to get there is engage in redistricting reform. I mean, you look at the U.S. House of Representatives right now, and it has been so gerrymandered that there's no room for Mickey Edwards. I mean, you were once called a conservative Republican. That is not the Mickey Edwards of 2017.
I was going to say Mickey Edwards, but the definitions have changed.
Yeah, right, but you know, we need, you know, the partisan gerrymandering that we see across this country. Until and unless we address that, I think it's going to be very hard, because there is no incentive in the U.S. House of Representatives to come to the middle. And the best example of that is immigration reform. In a bipartisan fashion in 2014, the Senate passed an immigration bill. Was it a perfect bill? No. Was it a good bill? Yes. And it came to the House, and it never got a vote. And one of the things that happened, and it was on the verge of getting a vote, and you know what happened? Eric Cantor lost, unexpectedly, to Dave Bratt. And it scared the bejesus out of John Boehner. And he said, no, I can't bring this up for a vote. And why? Because my people from the right are going to get a challenge from the right. And so you can't bring it up. If it had been brought up, there is no doubt in my mind that a majority of the U.S. House of Representatives would have supported the bipartisan Senate bill. There's no doubt in my mind. Same thing with minimum wage. You know, minimum wage has always been a bipartisan issue. Every president except two, until Barack Obama, since FDR signed the first Fair Labor Standards Act, has signed an increase in the minimum wage. But it didn't happen this time. And until and unless, Mickey, it seems to me that we can do that, I think it's going to be a real problem. And then the second issue is that, you know, when you don't know someone very well, it's a lot easier to demonize them. And my observation in a lot of places is that the folks who are trying to do the public good don't know each other very well. Michael and I can have spirited disagreements, but we know each other. And so, you know, it makes a difference. You know, back in the day, you know, you knew your colleagues' spouses, and you knew their children, and when they had a death in the family, you went to the funeral. And when there was a disability rights bill, you know, that there might have been a person who you didn't think would intuitively support it, but you knew their family and you knew they had a kid with a disability, and it changed their perspective on it. That stuff just isn't there anymore. You come Tuesday, you leave Thursday, and you know, do call time for some of Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And that's not what the founding fathers envisioned. And Citizens United has, I think, you know, poisoned the well inexorably. I mean, you look at the dark money that's going into these races, and it's just hard to compete. I don't think that corporations are people. And I think that has been one of the most poisonous things. And unfortunately, with this court, that ain't going to change.
Yeah, I agree. Mike, can we get back to you know, civil conversation and bipartisanship?
Oh, I think we can. You know, we all just take a few Xanax and have a couple of gin and tonics. We'll be good. I want to start with something.
Those will be out here in the hall after.
There. I want to start with something that Tom said. So, you know, I really appreciate what you're saying about the gerrymandering and the redistricting. But, you know, let's be honest, you guys weren't complaining about gerrymandering when you held the House for 40 years, all right? So it's you know, that's part of it. But I definitely agree with you that now that you're out more than you're in, and this goes true for both parties, there is this sense that something in the system has to change. And I think that that's important. Not just at the federal level with House seats, but you see it also in the state legislative races as well. A number of governors right now around the country, I think, are taking a very forward look at this argument and this discussion, and they're saying, let's have independent bodies without elected officials who have a vested interest in whether or not they keep their seat sitting at the table. Let's instead have citizens, have former judges, have maybe former elected individuals who understand the politics of it, decide. Places like California and elsewhere, I know my Governor Hogan is very much in Maryland looking at creating a new environment there, and hopefully that's something I'd speak to you as a Marylander, you can get behind in sort of leveling the playing field so that we don't have pterodactyl-shaped congressional districts like we do in the 3rd Congressional District of Maryland. And that's the reality of where we are. And so you either want to change that system or you don't. Well, you either want to change that system or you don't. Let me repeat myself. You either want to change that system or you don't. So don't go complaining to politicians about the, you know, the re-election rates, and don't go complaining about how, you know, dark money and all kinds of colored money in races. If you want to change the system, you will. He can't do it by himself. I couldn't do it by myself, and you're damn sure there's not a member on Capitol Hill who's going to change it, because it protects their interests. So if you want to change the system, you change it. Because the American people have the ultimate power to make government do what they want government to do. If you stop believing that, which a lot of folks have, and you get fat and lazy and comfortable by going to the voting booth, and you said it, just pulling the D and R because that's what you've always pulled, then you're going to get what you got. That's the reality of it. So get behind those efforts that are looking to change the system from the ground up. Lead on those efforts that look to change the system from the ground up. Otherwise, shut up.
So when we turn to questions, nobody who's fat, lazy, and comfortable can ask a question. Yeah, the gentleman in the back here against the window. Just stand up so they can find you. Yeah, back there.
Thank you. Larry Checo Communications. I want to ask you a very simple question. The word that's been left out of this whole discussion is narrative. What is your narrative? What is the narrative for the Democratic Party? What is the narrative for the Republican Party that people outside this beltway can understand? I'm a branding consultant. I always ask my clients 4 questions. 1, who are you? What do you do? How do you do it? And most importantly, why should anybody care? And I don't think either of the parties have answered those questions satisfactorily for the people out there. Thank you. I'm sorry, one more. Just not only what is the narrative for the Republican and Democratic Party, what is the narrative for us as Americans? We talked about values. We talked about who we want to be. Yeah. What's the American narrative? Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, we've got 20 minutes or so, so let me take 2 or 3 questions and then we'll just put them all together. Yes, right over here. Well, you need the microphone because we're on TV.
Hi, Gail Gottlieb, Women's National Democratic Club. On the subject of redistricting and leveling the playing field, do you all see any prospect for bipartisan cooperation in such schemes as interstate pacts? One had initially been proposed between Maryland and Virginia, where both would have independent redistricting committees. I don't want to get into all the permutations and how that original legislation has grown, but with the very concept of having a pact to level the playing field in a more systematic way.
Okay. Yes, right here. Well, you need the microphone.
Thank you. James Rosen with Fox News. I wanted to follow up on a comment from Chairman Steele that was directed to Chairman Perez just a few minutes ago with respect to the abortion issue. And what the chairman said, in essence, was you've just gotten a taste of this polarization within your own party. And if I understood the remark correctly, it was referring to this recent race for the mayoralty in Omaha, Nebraska. And as you're probably aware, the state party chair, the Democratic state party chair,
well, just make it a question,
in Nebraska, criticized you for essentially saying that if you're a pro-life politician, you're not welcome in the Democratic Party. And I wonder, Mr. Chairman, if you would respond to that criticism from the Nebraska State Party chair, and is it your view, if you would clarify, that no pro-life politician has a home in the Democratic Party?
Okay, one more back here, and then we'll lump these 4 together.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mark Hannes. I'm with Action Map. Chairman Perez, I'm curious, you talked about the big data analytics and then you talked about organizing. And to me, this gap is apparent when I was campaigning for Hillary or Obama. I was still using paper when I was knocking on doors or making phone calls, not my iPhone, not an iPad, not a computer. And I'm wondering, beyond hiring for a CTO or CIO, which I know you're about to do, how are you going to bring 21st century technology into the organizing aspect of the DNC? Okay,
so what we got is narrative, redistricting, including interstate redistricting. By the way, you're a politician. You answer whatever part of it you want. There is, more on the litmus test question, and then, bringing the 21st century into this process. So, answer whatever you want.
I'll start with the narrative, and just real quick. You're absolutely spot on with the question and the 4 points that you make. It is the unanswered challenge within parties themselves. One of the things that I grappled with and struggled with inside the party was trying to reconcile the post-Reagan era at a time when the party was beginning to emerge, almost a little bit, sort of wandering around on various issues and trying to understand where the trend lines were and really coming definitionally to who we are, what do we believe, what do we value. Then along came Trump. And Donald Trump reshaped that narrative in such a way that I don't think we still have yet addressed it beneath the surface. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge for Republicans, I can speak to Republicans, reconciling in their own minds who we are and what do we value. And you see this struggle played out on policy. How they talk now about, Russia. And, we know where the party was on Russia. We know where the party has always been on Russia since the days of Reagan. Well, we're not there now. Some of that is because of the president and how he's sort of talked about these things and moved them. But others aspects of it are sort of internal to the party itself as things around it have changed. Again, on social issues, you have a millennial generation within the party that is much more, to use the term, progressive than a lot of folks have articulated in the recent past. How do you reconcile this new generation that calls themselves Republican, that calls themselves conservative, but do have a different view on some of these issues than some of the party leaders and the platform may say? So these are issues, I think, that need to get reconciled around the narrative. How do you go out and talk to the American people about what you value, who you are? And how do they then see themselves in what you value and who you are? And that has to be broad enough if you really want to have a big tent to include a lot of different people, which is what I think your question spoke to, James.
I think your question about branding is a question that the Democratic Party has to do a better job of. We're about good jobs for everyone. We're about shared prosperity, economic opportunity for everyone. We're about making sure that zip code never determines destiny. And the American narrative is about the simple notion that every generation should be better off than the generation that preceded them. That's what my parents taught me. That's what we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, that's the timeless journey of America. And the angst is exactly that. We've had the income inequality that we've seen. It didn't start at the Great Recession. This is something that, if you look at the data, it has its roots dating back to about 1980. And so and there are many causes that are beyond the scope of the 3 minutes that I want to try to answer 4 important questions on. But that is part of what we have to do a better job of as Democrats. What do we stand for? And I've been asked that with great regularity, and we talk about that. And we're going out there and listening, because we don't want to have that conversation just here inside the Beltway. As it relates to the issue of compacts, I mean, there are a number of efforts, including on the national popular vote, you get the requisite number of states up to 270, and you could have a national popular vote in this country. And I think that's a very important set of advocacy that's going on across this country. And every year there's another state or two that are actively taking up that bill. The challenge that I think we have with redistricting is that every state is doing it differently. And if one state unilaterally disarms, another state is hyper-partisan, you end up where you are right now. And that's why I'm proud to be part of the Redistricting Commission, because we're trying to tackle this. Unfortunately, I think one of the most important ways we're going to have to tackle this is through litigation, because right now it's impossible to get rationality, I think, in many states in this country. And so that's something that we're going to continue to do. I say to a lot of people, this 2017, 2018 cycle at a state level, whether it's New Jersey, Virginia this year, and then others next year, that's not a 4-year cycle. This is a 12-year cycle, because the next set of governors are going to be playing a very important role in determining what you're going to see for the next dozen years. You asked a question about Nebraska. The platform of the Democratic Party is a pro-choice platform, and it reflects the fact that it's not simply a matter of women's health, it's a matter of women's economic security. The platform does not say that we do not welcome people who are not pro-choice. The platform says that we welcome people of varying views. Bob Casey is a good friend. Bob Casey does not legislate his values. Bob Casey has a personal belief that I totally respect, and others as well, who are Democrats, who are my friends, who I support. and will continue to support. And they are not legislating those beliefs because that's the law of the land. And by the way, 70% of the American public, including the majority of Republicans, support what is in the party platform of the Democratic Party. There was one final question, and that was on the issue of, who was it in the back?
The millennial
Analytics.
question.
Oh, analytics.
Right.
Yeah, you know, the analytic platform that we're having this conversation right now, and our chief technology officer is going to play a critically important role. And here's one thing that I have learned, and you know probably far more, is as we construct the tools for organizing in the 21st century, we've got to make sure that we don't simply have coders and computer geniuses at the table. We've got to have the organizers at the table, because I have seen a lot of well-intentioned money and minds get invested into things that just didn't work because they didn't have the front-end user at the table. So they thought they had a great idea, but in reality, because they didn't know the nuts and bolts of organizing, they weren't able to get it quite right. And so what we're doing, we have convened and we have established a permanent tech advisory council that's addressing all of these issues. How do you build the tools of the 21st century and beyond? And the thing we are making sure we do is to include all the various stakeholders who will enable us to make sure we invest good money in good projects, because there's just way too much IT money, both when I was in government and when I've been in politics, that gets spent in a well-meaning fashion but has very little ROI.
So we've got time for, let's get two more, and then we'll just, quickly wrap them up. Yes, here. Wait for the microphone.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sophie Bennett from the Murray School. As you both, I think, spoke about earlier, there's a lack of communication between liberals and conservatives. What can we do as young people in Washington, D.C., which is predominantly liberal, to foster meaningful conversation across these differences?
Very good.
I think
let's get one more.
Oh, you're going to bar? Okay.
Here's one over here in the corner. And then we've got about 6 minutes to wrap it up. Yeah.
How can the two parties and the representatives of the two parties enforce and motivate coherence between the articulated values and the policies that are pursued in furtherance or in opposition to those values? Just as an example, the organization that calls itself for flags and motherhood and apple pie is most likely to be a very strong party or organization to support non-motherhood, non-apple pie for anybody except a handful of people, et cetera.
Okay, so you're basically saying the way parties define themselves and what their policies seem to be at odds. Okay, so we got that. So let's very, very quickly. We got a couple minutes.
Real quick, conversation between liberals and liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats. I think for young people, you're already beginning to change that game. I look at how you are engaging in conversation, and how other groups are beginning to respond to that. So I would say continue to do that. Continue to push back on this idea that there's one way to look at an issue or there's one way to solve a problem. I like to look at the millennial generation, and I kind of sum it up this way. You guys look at problems and you go, is there an app for that? All right? And what that means, at least as I have come to understand it, is there's a lot that goes into solving this problem. Let's look at all those things and put them towards solving this problem, create the app. So I would encourage you to do that, to hold this party structure honest, and accountable, because that's what you're going to inherit. It's not going to go away. You're going to be running it. You're going to be controlling it, and you're going to have a lot to say about it. With respects to the parties enforcing coherency, parties have just got to stop lying about the truth.
As good an answer as we're going to get. Tom?
Yeah. If I were king for a day, which I will never be, what I would love to do is to force everyone, whether you're a self-described progressive Democrat or a self-described conservative Republican, to turn off all the television. And here is the issue of the day. And you have to make up your mind for yourself. Oh, my God. Because we are in a very dangerous cycle where you simply communicate within your echo chamber and reinforce predilections. And again, this is not meant to be, this is not partisan. This is, I observe this everywhere. And you're observing now that our housing patterns are starting to reinforce this. And so, we need to find ways to move away from this. And the millennial generation is that generation that can demand that. And you see more and more people who are unaffiliated, and I think they're demanding things. And so I hope that we can work together. And I hope, just as the millennial generation on issues of LGBT equality, I think that's a huge reason why we've moved at warp speed. Because young people keep saying to our generation, like, what the hell are you so obsessed about this issue with? That person is your roommate in the office. That person is your neighbor who you loved when that person was in the closet, and you should love just as much now. So I hope that young people, can continue to demand this. I will never purport to think that we will be able to enforce, coherence across the United States of America, because you know what? I'm strongly supportive of higher minimum wages. I support the Fight for 15 movement, but at the same time, I understand that success in certain states isn't $15 an hour. Ted Kennedy taught me that idealism and pragmatism are not mutually exclusive. Progressives make progress. And that's what we're about, is trying to make progress. And the challenge we have in both parties is that sometimes there's only two grades, 100% or 0, as defined by a few folks. Yeah. And that's a challenge that we have to overcome. And it's a work in progress.
I'm going to take the last couple of seconds just to say this. And it goes back to something Mike said. If all of your friends are fellow Democrats, or if all of your friends are fellow Republicans, and if you spend your time watching Fox or MSNBC, and you and your friends agree on everything, you're the problem. Start talking to people who disagree with you, understand them, learn them, love them, let's get back so that we have more of the way Tom and Mike are able to relate to each other as friends, that they can have their disagreements in a respectful, honest way. That's what the Aspen Institute stands for, and it's the key to the future, is let's stop dividing ourselves and then complaining about the fact that our leaders are divided. So Tom and Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mickey. Thank you.
Always fun.
Good job.
Thank you.